I wanted to bring forth, even my assistant said, Gail, there's so much out there about DEI. Can you say a few words about what DEI is? And, it's really, I'm talking on this a lot these days, but DEI has been co-opted, right? It has been co-opted to be antithetical to merit, to be illegal, which it is not, to be immoral. We know it's not immoral. It can't be immoral to create inclusive spaces for people. It can't be illegal to take care and make sure you're paying people equitably. None of this illegal or immoral. But if we say it enough, if the administration says it enough, anytime the president says anything, the media has to pick it up. He's the president. And so it just inundated with these terms about DEI being immoral and illegal, and it is not. It's not reverse discrimination. We are just creating equitable places for people to live and be treated with respect. So this definition about DEI comes out of Cornell University, their Cornell program. This is what I know to be true. We were all there when DEI took flight. And you might recall we were all stuck at home with COVID-19 in 2020. We were scared. And then we realized that Black and Brown people were having disparate outcomes with regard to COVID. And we didn't understand why. We wanted to understand why were people were more impacted by this. And at that time, the news picked it up and began to talk about systemic racism. And it was a word that was used in my circles, but I hadn't heard it on television ever. And now it was being talked about every day on news. It was used 1,600% more in 2020 than had ever been used. People wanted to know what was systemic racism. And nobody wanted to be complicit with systemic racism. Companies began to put out statements about systemic racism. In May of 2020, we saw George Floyd tragically murdered on television. We were collectively traumatized as a nation. Our kids went to the streets and protested. All across the world, they were protesting systemic racism. In London, they were protesting all across the world. And so this is when equity took flight. So they don't get to define what DEI is. We know what it is. We were there when it took flight. We saw the statements come out by companies voluntarily because nobody wanted to be complicit with systemic racism. Money being advocated to defeat systemic racism. This is how DEI took flight. And for a moment, I had a glimpse of hope because I saw my colleagues at work really earnestly learning about this stuff. And one good thing about that time is you can't take the learning back. You can change the names, you can change the words. There's been a lot of people making an effort to rebranding. That's not going to work because it's not really about DEI. This is bigger than DEI, right? This is America's reaction anytime we're making progress on civil rights. And we know we were making progress because the fight against it has been so heated. It has been so intense. So it's only that intense because it was working. People were trying to be more equitable. They were learning about implicit bias, right? Some people were threatened by it. Those were people who have had privilege their whole life and maybe really believing in that, pie, what is it? That fixed pie game that, if I get something, then if somebody else gets something, that's less for me, right? There's always been enough for everybody in America. So I wanted to bring my voice into the room and say, we know what DEI means. I will, because it's been co-opted, not use DEI anymore. I'll probably use the words diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? That's what it means. And so I'll stay away from that acronym because it has been co-opted, right? But don't let anybody tell you what it is. We know what it is. And the other thing I would say is to educate, to advocate, and to activate, right? And to take care of ourselves. We are in the fight for our lives, for our young lives. Our parents, our ancestors fought for us. Now we're in the fight for our lives and the lives of our children. And we're not going back. Okay, we're not going back. Let me just say that.